After tackling short row heel socks on my Brother KH940 standard gauge knitting machine, I'm ready to mix it up a little bit and work on some socks with an Afterthought heel. My Afterthought socks will have contrasting toes, heels, and cuffs, and I'm really excited to work on these. I'm planning to make 4 pairs of socks. 2 of them will be a standard women's sock that has a regular length leg. Then I'll have a pair of short women's socks that will have just maybe an inch above the ankle, and then a toddler pair of socks. I have 2 skeins of this incredibly loud yarn that I'm planning to use for this project. This is the Regia Floromania color. And it is bright, so I'm really excited to make kind of fun, funky socks out of it. This is a 75% wool, 25% nylon blend. I believe a skein 100 grams. Yeah, so 100 grams of this is 420 meters or 460 yards. So it's a pretty generous skein. So I'm pretty sure that with the contrast, I will be able to get everything out of this yarn that I expect. The machine knitting for this is going to be very simple. It's just going to be a series of very long tubes. I'm going to cast on and off on waste yarn, and then I will make a cut for the Afterthought heel. If you've been following my Lopi videos, you know that I'm going to be steeking, so for some reason I've just decided that this time is the time that I really want to cut into my knits. A website that I find really helpful when I'm working on patterns, especially when I'm doing something somewhat improvisational like this, is the Craft Yarn Council. They have a variety of standards listed on their website that are incredibly helpful, including things like foot size for socks. For a pair of socks, I want somewhere between 10 and 15% negative ease. So that means that I'm going to make the tube of the sock 10 to 15% smaller than the actual circumference of the recipient's foot. I'll use the information that I gathered from my swatch to determine how many stitches I actually need to do in the round. So for example, the toddler socks. The toddler socks, according to the Craft Yarn Council, should have a 5.5 inch circumference around the foot. I want 10 to 15% negative ease, which means that I'll be at about 4 3/4 of an inch for the circumference of the finished socks. So multiplying out my gauge should give me the appropriate number of stitches to cast on. For the adult women's size socks and the toddler size socks, I want to make sure that I have an even number of stitches so that it's easy for me to divide between the 2 needle beds. I will be knitting these socks as tubes, so I will be using my ribber to go ahead and do the bulk of the knitting. There's 2 big advantages in my mind to doing an Afterthought heel in this case. The first thing that I really like about it is I found the short row really slowed me down in my knitting, and I thought that it would be nice to just be able to knit straight through. The second thing is that I actually didn't love the heel as it turned out on my first pair of socks that I made. It's fine, but I definitely wasn't doing my wrap and turns correctly. I know how to do them now, and I think I'd be better at it, but I like trying different techniques and new things. I have much better control and understanding of hand knitting because I've been doing it for so much longer. So I know that if I have a concern about a part of my sock or my heel, that I'll be able to fix it in the hand knit portion of it in a way that I really wouldn't be able to do on my machines, at least not yet. Another thing that's nice about knitting an Afterthought heel is that I don't have to make a decision about what I want my contrast to be yet. So if this is my main color, I have 2 options for what I'm going to do for the contrast. I can either use this Hedgehog Fibers twist sock that I've had in my stash for a while. This is 80% BFL, 20% nylon in colorway UFO. It's quite bright. I used this and some speckles to make a plumpy a couple of years ago that I'll include a photo of. My plumpy was, I really wanted like a highlighter shawl. My friend had made, I believe, a lily pilly in very, very bright colors. And she calls it her highlighter lily pilly. So I really wanted a highlighter plumpy. Plumpy is a pattern by Andrew Mowry that I have knit twice. I like it. And I was at a local yarn store that was going out of business, and I had gotten a pretty decent deal on the hedgehog. So I didn't know how much of this I would need, so I had bought 2 skeins. So I do have just a tiny bit of leftovers of it left, and then a full skein. The other option for my Afterthought heel is just my like main lovely white workhorse yarn, which is Malabrigo sock. Back in the day, I had purchased 7 skeins of this yarn because I thought that I was going to make a Persian Dreams. I made 1 hexagon of Persian Dreams and decided that that was not a pattern that I was actually going to enjoy making, even though I like color work. So I have a ton of this still in my stash. I use it all the time. I love Malabrigo sock. I think it's a great yarn. It's comparatively extremely affordable, and I use it a lot. So I might use this for my contrast. In that case, it doesn't really matter if it's a perfect match or not for the stripes in the yarn. All right, it's time to start knitting. The first part of any machine knitting project is obviously setting up the machine. After casting on with waste yarn, I am ready to start with my main color. For the toddler socks, I knit to round 214, which is the equivalent of 107 rows. For the toddler size socks, I knit to row counter 214, which is the equivalent of 107 rounds. second tube done, I'm ready to switch back to waste yarn and then cast off. The last things I need to do at my machine are snip my working yarn, take off my weights, knit off the working yarn, and now I'll have my tube. Well, it's a good thing that I started with the toddler socks because I think I screwed up my gauge a little bit. So this isn't terrible. I'm gonna call it 1/4 of an inch off from where I wanted to be. So that's not bad, but lengthwise I definitely have a problem. And I definitely miscounted my gauge swatch. So here's 5. So this individual sock, I don't know what you would call it, sock sleeve, sock blank, is almost 10 inches long. That is way too long for a toddler sock. The foot total length is only supposed to be 5 inches. I think I need to look at the website again. And the height is only supposed to be 3 inches. So if I cut this sock up and added a toe and added a heel, I think that this would wind up being like practically a knee sock. And I know the toddler who's receiving this will not want to wear knee socks. So instead, what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to add a toe. I will put in my Afterthought heel. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut in the middle, add a toe, add the cuff, another Afterthought heel, and then a cuff. So basically I'll wind up with 2 pairs of socks out of this. They're going to have a little bit of a shorter leg, which is fine because they're just for a toddler. But yeah, I need to recheck my gauge because what I was getting was way off from what I think I actually am getting for the length that I need. Okay, so I went ahead and pulled my swatch back out so I can remeasure it because, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think I had measured correctly, and my sock wound up way longer and a little narrower than I expected. With one of these retractable tape measures, it can be a good idea to actually measure from 1 inch and beyond, just because this part can wind up getting really stretched out and uneven. So it can be really nice to have something that you know is going to be a little bit more consistent. So when I'm measuring a swatch that has such tiny stitches, I have a trick that I like to use. This is my teeny tiny notions box. I love it. It is a lifesaver. So within my teeny tiny notions box, I have a couple of tulip markers, and I'll measure. I can tell this has been stretched out a good bit, so I'm actually going to start at 4. I'm going to hook this guy in, start on this guy. It's going to be right at the center of that stitch. And this happens to hit at the center here. And now I can count. So that's 33 stitches to 4 inches. Let's take a look at my row gauge now. I have less length here, so I'm actually going to do 2 inches worth. So 24. So I think last night I had counted 26. So it was a little bit off on my row gauge. Okay, so I have my first sock most of the way done. I just actually need to put the Afterthought heel in. So you can see I've already added the toe and the cuff. And this was something I cut out of my long tube of socks. So I have the Craft Yarn Council's website up here. So for US size 5 to 9 foot, the foot circumference was 5.5 inches. The total foot length is 4 3/4 to 6 inches. Now the toddler that these are going to be for is a little bit smaller foot. Currently wearing, I believe, a size 6. It's August. Who knows what size their feet will be by the time Christmas rolls around. But I'm going to say we're going to go with a total foot length of 5.5 inches. So when we're looking at total foot length, what we're looking at is from the tip of the toe to the tip of the heel. Now, the heel does not exist yet. This is basically just a tube sock right now. So what we're going to do is take a look at the length of the toe and then subtract that from our total length, and then that will be the point at which I'm going to cut my sock. So I'm going to start at 6 inches just because I know it's not stretched out. The toe length here is almost exactly 1 inch. So I know I want my sock overall to have a foot length of 5.5 inches. So I'm going to count to 4.5 inches because I'm going to have the same length for the foot or for the heel as I do for the toe. So since I want the sock to be 5.5 inches for foot length total, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this is 1, 2, 3, 4.5, and that is going to be the row that I'm going to cut because I'm going to have an extra inch for the heel. So I'm just going to throw a marker on this row. So I know that the heel is going to be the same length as my toe because it's basically constructed the exact same way. So now I need to take all of the stitches from the row below and the row above and put them on my needle. And when I do this, I'm always taking the right leg of the stitch. I missed a stitch on this side. Because I should have 19. Okay, I did miss a stitch. Okay, and now I just need to do the same thing on the row above the stitch marker. Okay, so I have my 19 stitches, which is how many stitches wide the body of my sock is on both sides. So I've picked up all my stitches, and now it's time for the fun part, which is cutting. Okay. So I have both of my needles are pulled through. I just have the cable on here, and I'm grabbing my super sharp scissors. I have these mini scissors. I love them. I use them for everything. They are super sharp and super tiny, and they're just perfect. Okay, so I'm going to take a snip here in the middle, and it's actually pretty important that I take the snip in the middle because I'm going to need to weave this end in, and it's not a lot of yarn. Oh, here we go. All right, I should be snipped. Make sure I got all the threads there. I think I did it. There we go. Okay. Now I'm going to unweave this row of knitting that's in between my needles with a tapestry needle. Okay, and I'm now 2 stitches away, and I'm going to leave these here just so that I don't wind up with a hole on my Afterthought heel. Now I'm going back the other direction. Okay, now I can start my knitting. So I'm going to shove my ends in. I clearly decided to go with the white. So I'm going to knit 2 rounds even, and then I'm going to start decreasing. And I decrease the same way that I did for the toe. So I'll knit 2 rounds even, and then I knit 1, slip, slip, knit to the last 3 stitches, knit 2 together, knit 1. Same thing on the second needle, and then I knit 1 round even, and then I do the decrease round again. So it's only 2 rounds, so it's pretty simple. These first stitches are kind of tight because they have the yarn still in them. Make sure I'm using the right tail here to knit. And I tend to do this where I knit a couple of stitches with my tail in. And that kind of secures my ends and weaves it in. For the adult socks, I'm gonna do the same thing, but instead of knitting 2 rounds even, I'll knit 4. So I'm clearly doing this magic loop. You could do this with any like double pointed needles if you prefer to do that. I am a circular knitting needle all the way kind of person. I don't think I've ever, I think since I like made my very first socks, I don't think since then I've ever made a pair of socks with double pointed needles. Okay, so I finished my first round, coming back to the second one. This is where I'm just knitting these two legs together because I have the tail in here. It'll be a little bit bulkier at this point in the sock, but it's a sock for a toddler. I don't really care. Okay, 2 rounds done, so that's feeling much more comfortable now. The machine's gauge is a little bit tighter than mine. So I probably should have loosened up the tension a little bit, but I'm not going to do that for the other socks because I know the gauge that I'm getting with this. Okay, first round, so of decreases, so I knit 1, slip, slip, knit, knitting across the row. And I'm going to keep repeating these 2 rounds until I have 9 stitches left on each needle. That's the that's how many I had for the toe when I grafted the toe together, and then I'm just going to do the exact same thing here. I'm just going to graft it together. So okay, last 3 stitches, knit 2 together, knit 1. And then I will graft, or it's also known as Kitchener, the toes. Ah, not the toes, the heels. I already did the toes. Okay, slip, slip, knit. This also gives you a good idea of the speed of my knitting. I'm going to keep knitting and I will check back in when this heel is done. Alright, I have now finished my heel, which is great. I'm really happy with how it looks. The sock is a little bit short, but for a toddler I'd rather have a little bit of a short sock as opposed to a sock that's like way too long. So since I started on the heel there, I also added the toe and ribbing for the second sock, and I'll need to do that Afterthought heel. I also have my tube for my second pair of small socks. I considered unraveling this and using it for another pair, but I actually realized, like, thinking it through, the way that this yarn works is that it's not a perfect stripe, but it's like a stripe, and I don't know where this would actually fit in with the pattern. I'm gonna cut this apart last, so if I need a little bit of extra, I have it, but I'm pretty sure that it would be hard for me to match where this would actually go within this yarn. The one thing that would be nice about cutting into it is I could wind up with like an actually fairly well matched pair of socks, which I do not have right now because these two do not match. And then I would have this pair, and then I'd have like this pair, which isn't perfect, but it's closer than what I have right now. Yeah, just time to do the Afterthought heel on this one. Alright, these socks are done, and it is on to the next project.